I hate the reality of what it is about.
Yeah.
I hate society.
Hi, I'm Gabe.
And I'm Kat.
And we're the Ghouls Next Door. Talk about spooky stuff.
As we do.
Yes.
You know.
Yes. It's been a minute, but you all should know that we are the media analysis podcast from a horror lens, where we explore the real life, historic, and psychological reasons behind our cinematic fears. We're doing it.
I think the real theory for me is that the reason my vision declined is so that I could wear glasses all the time to really represent our brand of media analysis glasses. I think that's the real thing that happened.
It's the long con for your eyes.
Yeah, I think my body was like, this is what you say all the time, so we're going to make it a reality. This is our gift to you, self.
You have low vision.
No, great vision, because now need glasses always.
Yes.
Always media analysis glasses, never off, always on.
Yes. We are in our second month of the Good Ghouls Gone Bad series, where we're talking about ladies. We're talking about women's issues in film, some of which are issues that come up again and again, often with the same culprit responsible, the patriarchy. So,
yeah,
it is what it is. It happens. I feel like now when I watch movies, I'm like, okay, but this other movie did it better. It's been 4 years of watching a horror movie every week, where I got to the point where I think I'm a little snooty.
Yeah. Snooty, but still watch other stuff.
Yeah.
It was, we had a fun moment this week where it's like, let people enjoy. I was like, no.
Yeah.
I won't let rage is the only path to revolution, and we must burn everything down. So we cannot enjoy any films. We have to be mad.
Always.
But that's not true. But it is, and it's a mix of both. Yeah. And yeah, that's what I'm channeling always, forever now.
Yeah. Well, I think the thing is that's important, because I feel like it's been a minute. Usually we cover films that we enjoy, or we found that we enjoy.
It's true.
And every now and again, there's a film where we're like, oh, we didn't like this. And we have to talk about why. And I think that's fun, because we don't know really, a lot of the times, this is our first time watching it was for the show, right? Mm-hmm. Unless it's we really liked a film, we want to fit it in, so we make a whole series about it.
Yeah.
But with this, it was our first time, and I was I heard about it. It looked interesting. It fits into the category of Good Ghouls Gone Bad. Let's do it. It was even a last minute change, and then I was like, oh, why'd we do this? But that kind of says, because we're talking about a Hulu film, False Positive, that you saw from the title of this episode. And I would say I don't know of a Hulu horror film that I have actually enjoyed. Genuinely.
Tragedy Girls.
Okay, that's it. That was on Hulu?
Yes.
You certain? Okay.
Yeah, I'm pretty certain it was on Hulu. Because it was part of that little series, not our series, their series, where they were doing a bunch of different horror ideas.
Yeah, well, because they.
If I'm wrong, yell at me, internet. But I think
it says Hulu.
Tragedy Girls.
The internet says Hulu. Yeah. They had the horror series where they did every holiday was a horror film. That's why we covered Culture Shock about the 4th of July, I believe. I've watched a few of them, and every time we did New Year, New You. That was okay. That was okay. It's fine.
I didn't hate this movie. I just didn't like it.
Yeah.
I hate the reality of what it is about.
Yeah.
I hate society. But the movie wasn't good. But it wasn't
No.
like, I wasn't like, this is the worst. I'm so mad. Worst movie. It was just like, it exists. It was,
It's definitely not, I would say, not in the realm of like the movies we loathe.
Yeah.
We do often do that. But it's certainly not a movie I would tell anyone to watch.
Yeah. Like, I get why it was made. Like, I get it happened. Like, I don't get like why it was made and like if there was a good reason for it to be made, but like I get like how it came to be.
It could have been made differently and by different people. And that's always the case, right? And now, you know, oftentimes we're very excited about a premise and then it falls short, like with Bit. Like, Bit is such a phenomenal premise and it was a great film until it wasn't anymore. And then we were sad. Right?
Yeah.
Like, I think that happens a lot too. And that was with this, where I
they
had
just got rid of
bigger
the ending of
expectations,
it.
I thought, than I would.
That's
and then
fair.
I was like trying to find things to like, and I couldn't. So today we were talking about False Positive, which you said is on Hulu. That is a horror film about pregnancy. Right? So it's about pregnancy and about the challenges of getting pregnant, challenges of being pregnant. Disclosure, disclaimer that Kat and I, neither of us have ever been pregnant.
Yeah.
Just never.
We don't have human babies
We
at
do
this
not
time.
have any of those. We have cats.
Yeah.
So we can't say from experience. We know humans who've had other humans. And you know, talk to them, and we read about it. We know that. And because it's something that both of us potentially want in our future, we have, you know, at least some understanding of what to expect in that world. So just putting that out there. We don't have any babies. So
we cannot speak from personal experience in this end, but I guess like just because you haven't experienced it doesn't mean you can't learn to empathize with the situation and stuff. Like, you may not understand, but you can learn about it as much as possible. And
you could try,
empathize.
which would have been good for this movie to do.
Yeah.
If we could try. That would.
I think the real horror story of this film is less about pregnancy and more about just that men are trash as in existing. Like,
it's kind of like our sub. Like of our show. It's like horror and media analysis. Also, people are trash. And then in that, it's like men mostly. Yeah,
most of the time. 9 out of 10 times, men. And that's my takeaway from this film, more so than the pregnancy end. Like, it definitely made me feel violated and like I didn't want to have children ever, unless it was like in the middle of nowhere and not in a hospital, or just like have no men anywhere near me for the entirety of the 9 months and probably like the first 3 afterwards. Is the emotions that this film made me feel. And that nothing to do with like just that pregnancy seems hard. That's real. And I don't think I'm going to have a fun time if/when it happens. But yeah, my takeaway really was just like, ew, men though. Why?
Yeah.
Ugh.
I would say also just like as a woman, like there's like a lot of gynecology scenes. It's 85% on that table is this whole film, which is like I ended up having like a nightmare just about any time going there, and how uncomfortable that is, and how vulnerable and yeah, just it's a sensitive position to be in, and it's always unpleasant. There's never a time where I was like, ooh, that was what a good visit. What a good time. What a
grand time.
And I do remember you saying when we were watching it, like how we're also like, and I feel this way too, is being uncomfortable with having male gynecologists. Like, no, I don't think I would ever. I just don't.
I have never in my existence had a positive experience with a male doctor, and there's a lot medically wrong with me.
Same.
So I go to doctors a lot. And any instance where I've had a male doctor, they not only gaslit me, invalidated my experience, and made me feel like I was just a hysterical woman who was depressed. And that's what it was. Like, that was the reason I didn't feel okay. And I'm not saying all men shouldn't be doctors, but I'm saying I do not want to work with any of them ever.
Yeah.
From my experiences thus far.
And I'll tell you about this time because I'm gonna open it up for me to talk now.
Do it.
Cool. So as I said a few times, we're talking about False Positive, which is from 2021. It is brand new, and so we threw it up into our schedule immediately and then watched it. We have actually watched quite a few pregnancy movies for this show, and this is not one we like. So this is directed by John Lee, and the synopsis is, as if getting pregnant weren't complicated enough, Lucy sets out to uncover the unsettling truth about her fertility doctor. Let's dive in. Let's get into this. I do want to say that I didn't loathe this movie, like we were saying. I didn't love it. I don't think I want to punch anybody who made it. But I don't also super enjoy that I watched it. But it's also what was I expecting from a Hulu horror movie? 1 out of the 10 that I've seen being good, and that was Tragedy Girls. So anyway, John Lee's False Positive is a slow anticlimactic thriller dressed up as several other movies with none of their charm. It tries to be Stepford Wives, it tries to be Rosemary's Baby, tries to be anything that's remotely interesting, and it was marketed to feel as if it were a new millennial vision for Rosemary's Baby, with the modern pregnancy horrors that feature IVF treatments. Which is alluring, and that's why I picked it. Because I was like, that sounds interesting. Also, we appreciate Rosemary's Baby. We have also already covered a film that has Rosemary's Baby-esque themes in it and did a really good job. The story follows a couple, Lucy, who's played by Ilana Glazer from Broad City. I do not recognize her in this without her curls. And honestly, that might be a part of why I felt like I didn't trust the character Lucy, too. I was thinking about that earlier. Because I just was like, who is this? I was like, why? Why are you due? It just, everything about her felt really fake, in that she was trying to be a person that people wanted her to be. And that made me uncomfortable in the way that Kat often feels uncomfortable but with inauthenticity. And then her husband, Lucy's husband, Adrian, is played by Justin Theroux from The Leftovers. That's what I know him from, and I enjoyed him in that. And they navigate the world of IVF treatment after years of failed attempts at getting pregnant in the more traditional ways. It False Positive wants you to fear pregnancy, but not for any of the appropriate reasons. I think comparing this film to Rosemary's Baby is a disservice to not only that film, but the horror genre itself. Because Rosemary's Baby was as much a scary film about Satan and cults as it was about the lack of bodily autonomy for women in our medical systems. It was a social horror film whose commentary blends the genre with its message quite flawlessly. False Positive wants you to think it's a smart film about women's empowerment while also reaffirming the same narratives that bind them. So instead of actually doing all the work that Rosemary's Baby's doing, it's just riding on the coattails of something as great as Rosemary's Baby and not doing any of the work. It's get it, yeah,
you're not wrong.
Preach. As I said, we've covered horror films about pregnancy previously, or horror movies in which there were pregnant people. And I think the strength of those others, so we covered Good Manners and Lyle recently, was that they didn't lean into the pregnancy is terrifying premise. And this is to say that pregnancy can be terrifying and is risky, and there's no end to what horror media could actually do with the real horrors of creating and birthing a human being. People have died giving birth or have had their bodies drastically altered by the process. So there's so much to be said about the horrifying ways in which women's bodies are controlled, manipulated, and stolen by our patriarchal society. And we could discuss abortion, genetic manipulation, rape, postpartum depression. The list goes on. There's innumerable things that can be said about the horrors around pregnancy. And I feel like False Positive tees up opportunities to explore some of these themes, but actually never dives into them. And it really leaves you confused and dissatisfied. And even at some points angry, because you wanted, even if you don't know that your media analysis glasses on, odds are you might feel cheated by this plot because it's setting up moments where you think something is going to happen and then nothing happens. Yeah. There's one line in particular that's said in the beginning of this film that immediately rubbed me the wrong way and more or less kind of set me up to not enjoy this film. And it's like one of the first lines we ever hear Lucy say. And it's with Lucy and Adrian, and they're discussing the decision to do the treatments after years of trying. And Lucy is feeling really sad about her supposed failure as a woman for not being able to do this one thing, which is totally valid. Right. And for a lot of people who have been trying and attempting to get pregnant for years with no luck, it could really wear you down and it could do a number on your emotional health. Like, totally understandable that she was vulnerable and felt this way. But she says something along the lines of, I'm not able to do the one thing women are supposed to do, which I was like, wow, rude. Like, first of all, that's incredibly false. Women could do many things. All things. And not all women can have children or want to. And that doesn't make them any less of a woman. And that's also not even counting the fact that trans men can have children. Like, what are we doing here? Like, like that one line, I was like, it's so rude. And it wouldn't be as bad, just in that it is an inward kind of reflection and a sad remark towards herself, that Lucy is like, I feel like a failure, which is totally understandable that you feel that way and that you should feel comfortable to say that in that moment. But never is there a time, like, her husband doesn't push back and there's no revelation in the end that is not the case. It's never said, like, it's okay that you can't, or it's okay that, like, or just saying, like, you're wrong. Not, like, we never see another woman who isn't doing this traditional thing of having children or struggling to have children. Like, her friends are dismissed. Like, they're too, like, wild and party crazy. They're nothing but a sentence and are supposedly her best friends that he doesn't like because they're non-traditional women, like, quote unquote, not having children or not ready to have children.
They're young. I think it also just ignores the statistical evidence that men more often than not, like, society views it as the woman's fault for not being able to have kids, when statistically it usually has to do with the sperm of the man, and they just don't check that as often because all the pressure and, like, failure and thoughts are put onto the woman, which is just like I mean, all right, looking at you, King Henry the 8th. Don't kill women because they didn't have the babies, because it seems like it might be your fault, bud. And even still, like, they're, like, just kind of off on the side is, like, there's a moment where they're like, you're fine and we can do this. And she's like, we went to so many other doctors, and it's just, like, blown over. Like, it's not like you just couldn't. Like, it was just like, oh, you just had this one little blip that was wrong. The other doctors didn't see, but I'm going to fix you. And when we get to the end, which I will, when we enter spoiler town, I'll let everyone know, that reveal does not answer why she was not able to have children this whole time. Unless you're pointing again at the husband. If you're like, clearly it wasn't her fault. If this happened so quickly. Anyway, I think Lucy and every other character in this film have a very specific vision for women and what they're supposed to be. And I think the aggravating thing about this film is that itself isn't the commentary being made. Like, that's not the problem in this film, is that there's that specific view of women. It's just, that's just how it is. In an article I found on Vulture called Hulu's False Positive Isn't Horror, But It Will Freak You Out by Helen Shaw, they say, yet at various points in the movie, some seemingly feminist guy, a boss, a husband, a doctor, will let his pretense slip.
Which one will be the monster? The movie hints that in some way, they all are. And I think even the women in this film were anti-feminist, and they dismiss Lucy's concerns as mommy brain or working to uphold the patriarchal white supremacist and eugenic ideological beliefs held by Dr. John.
Yeah.
I would even go further in saying that Lucy, too, is a monster. Because for all their performative feminism, so the husband who gives Lucy the illusion of control, the doctor who acknowledges the strength of women but diminishes their worth by insinuating they exist to produce more men, and the boss who values her female input but uses her pregnancy to garner sympathy while continuing to have her place their lunch orders. Lucy isn't any better than them. I just didn't trust or like Lucy throughout the entirety of this film any more than the men. Like I said, she came off as fake and just as Stepford Wivesy as the pink outfitted nurses at Dr. John's. She didn't see the injustice of how she was treated as being a bigger issue within the patriarchy. Like she wasn't looking at this like all women, like women have to suffer this way, or like this is a foundational problem and we need to make a change. She wasn't having any kind of awakening like that. It was just that she was upset that it was happening to her. Mm-hmm. And why her when she's the one who's been doing all the things right? She's the one who's not speaking up when she's not supposed to. She's, wearing the clothes she's supposed to wear. She listens to the husband. She, performs the womanly duties that she thinks she's supposed to. So why not her? Why is she suffering? Right. And that's not to say again, that's not the commentary. That's just expected of her. And I feel like this film is attempting to be many things and accomplishing not a single thing. Kate Erbland on IndieWire in their article, False Positive Review, Ilana Glazer's pregnancy thriller isn't a bad Rosemary's Baby riff, it's worse. Starts their piece out with some hurtful truths that I was like, yes, come for this person's career, it's fine. John Lee's aimless feature isn't dark enough to be scary, funny enough to be a comedy, or smart enough to say anything about the main topic it seems to want to tackle. Whew. Yeah. True. This film is trying so hard, and it tells more than it shows, and in the end, there's nothing to learn. And I left the movie questioning what I was supposed to leave with, and feeling really aggravated that there was nothing to show for what I just watched. There is this fun line towards the end when midwife Grace says, "I'm not your magical negress," after hearing Lucy recall that her office had been more tribal or traditionally African, because Lucy had essentially fantasized an entire persona for Grace to fulfill this role of the magical negress. So it was like, you're going to help the white character do this thing. Which is awful, right? And I enjoyed that line because I was like, okay, girl, get it. But we had not enough of Grace for that to feel valid or more than, again, performative. And this part was surprisingly funny, surprising in that so much of this film was deadpan and lifeless, that little line was a zap of any activity. But it read to me the way that the rest of the film reads and what the characters feel. And to me, it felt as if John is trying to say look, see, I get it. Men are trash. White people be like that sometimes. Yeah. I'm hip. I'm in. And I was I was like, this is nothing. What you said is nothing. You just made a joke about your own thing. It's not cool. Pick a thing, pick a lane to be in, and then make it about that. And during a perhaps hallucinated, because I'm actually not entirely sure it was real, advertisement video for Grace's midwife service, Grace explains how women have been giving birth since the dawn of time, and only now, with men in charge of the medical field, have they felt so vulnerable. So now it's oh, we have to be delicate with women, we have to do all these things, put it in the care of men, and they will protect you. And Grace is pretty much ladies been doing this for each other, for forever. And then all of a sudden you're here. And she's not wrong. And it was a part of the film at that time that I appreciated. But that message wasn't ingrained in the films, but rather just a passing thought. Again, similar to the like, look, see, men suck, right? You shouldn't trust men in the medical industry. And in the end, despite using Grace's natural services, Lucy still ends up at the hospital. And it's like, why? What does that mean for all that talk about not needing men and their medical knowledge to only end up with him back between her legs?
Yeah.
Lee is trying so hard to say how much he is an ally that he misses out on actually being one. And now I want to enter into Spoiler Town. So I would say, watch it before if you want to, but it's fine. You could also just listen to this and know why you don't have to. Because it's honestly, most of it is just, she keeps ending up back into the hospital getting tests for whatever reason. And it's just vignettes of her life.
No other doctor, like this doctor.
Yeah, just always in this one room. Like, that's all it is. And sometimes I don't know what genre it is, really, because it's always something. It's always something new. I don't know. It's weird. So let's enter Spoiler Town, and I'll tell you. The end reveal gave me the same feeling that the documentary film Catfish did. Not a lot of people watch Catfish, but they probably watch the show that's on MTV. Which came after the documentary. But in Catfish, it's revealed, surprise, that the woman he had been speaking to was not who she said she was. Yeah. That he had been catfished. And it was a twist that would have been maybe earth-shaking during the earlier years of the internet, but in 2010, it was lackluster and uninteresting. We had already lived so long with our lives online. Like, I grew up knowing about internet stranger danger and that people lie on the internet. That's not a reveal. So to see that the big reveal of a documentary that was advertised to be bizarre and completely unpredictable mystery by IndieWire was very mundane and incredibly predictable. Yeah. Its name was Catfish. Like, honestly, it was like, we knew what the word catfish was. It wasn't a surprise. So if you came out like 5 years earlier, 10 years earlier, people would have been like, what? Oh my God, now there's a word for it. This film was just like that. Because in the final moments, it's revealed that Dr. John has been inseminating women with his own sperm. And it was like, we kind of already knew that he was doing that.
I called that, like, I think within the first 20 minutes. I don't know if you remember. I was like, that's him. He said, you were like, clones.
Yeah.
And then I was like, clones. He is 100% inseminating these women with his own sperm. I don't know if that's actually true, but that is my theory. And then the rest of the movie happened and we were like, yeah. No, we knew
he was never trustworthy.
That he was a gross person. Like, what?
Yeah. What did he was even saying? Yeah. He does say clone. Everything. He's never trustworthy. It's always kind of gross. It wasn't a surprise. And the thing about it is that this is a real thing that has happened to women, and it is horrific. Kat is going to discuss it in her section, and it is why, where we had a hard time getting pumped for this episode, because it is very real. It's one of those real horrors that is just mind-boggling that it exists, and that anyone has the audacity or understanding of themselves to do such a thing that's as monstrous as this. And so in this end, right, like, Dr. John is as gross as he's ever been. He is revealed to essentially be a white supremacist who believes it's his destiny to populate the world with his perfect seed, right? Like, he thinks he is the best of men, and it is his job. And all the women who work for him believe that. And at one point, Lucy in this moment says, "You raped me. You raped me." And he, like, brushes it off, but she says it with, like, no drive and almost like it's a question. And to me, it felt like as if John Lee were afraid to make that statement fact. Because in the end, she is right. Yes. And that was the real horror story, right? Like, he murdered her daughter and lied to her, keeping her sons. And he did, in fact, rape her. But it's a question and it's blown off. Like we've covered population control in the past. So if you do want to hear more on this incredibly gross decision to keep males to carry on the family name, you can check out that episode and also hear about other horrifying ways the government has controlled women's bodies. You can check that out. But I think it was worse for me that her reaction was so dulled and muted, and it had no triumphancy. Like, even in the end when she's, like, exacting revenge, it was like, for what? What is she actually feeling in this moment? No one knows, because she doesn't know. Because she doesn't tell you anything.
Yeah. That was the moment where it was very evident that it was written by a man.
Yes. Yeah, that one line, I was like, that is true, but she's not saying it like it's true. She's saying it like it's a suggestion, and she doesn't know if she's allowed. Yeah. And so it's like playing it safe, but still trying to be radical, right? Yeah. And I think one of the worst parts in the end is that she hallucinates releasing the boys from her several stories apartment building window, which was like always without a screen. I thought that would stress me out. It was always shown without a screen, and I was like, no one should do that. I've seen, whatever. But I felt that was revolting. And because to me, it's like those boys had nothing to do with what happened to her, right? Like, they are innocent. And had this scene not happened in the final 10 minutes, and we were allowed to, like, unpack, we could have actually had real conversations about the trauma of giving birth to a child out of rape. But like everything else in this film, we are offered up this thin layer of horrors around pregnancy, but never actually allowed to talk about it. It's almost as if John Lee doesn't actually want us to think about the issues he poses, but instead wants us to think that he thinks about them. And so here's a tip. Don't use women's bodies and issues as a button for horror without actually exploring and respecting those realities and taking the time to give them the attention that they deserve. Because that's it. You're trying to say all these things and you don't know any of it. And that's honestly the worst part of this film. And if you want a modern day Rosemary's Baby twist and turns film that will stress you out but also empower you, you should watch Lyle, which we covered in our queer horror series, and we're absolutely delighted. And it is short. It's only an hour long. It's super quick. And you can also check out Good Manners, which we also covered then, and it features pregnancy and werewolves. So do that instead. Don't watch this film. We watched it, so you don't have to. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, while we're in Spoiler Town, for a different show, Handmaid's Tale, it made me think Lucy was very reminiscent of, after you had said that Lucy's reminiscent of I forget what the main evil dude's name is, the commander, his wife.
Fred. His name's Fred because her name is Of Fred.
Of Fred, yes.
Of Fred.
The wife in that scenario, who basically is upholding the patriarchy with the hopes of being able to control it. And then when it damages her, her view is not, oh no, this is happening to women. It is, oh no, this is happening to me.
Yeah, how could it happen to me?
Yeah. And still just very much feels ownership over this child that is like not in any way hers, is and like only wants this system to benefit her. And it kind of just goes back to the whole intersectionality of feminism and the role white women play and the damage that they do, in the hopes that they'll get to actively benefit from the system instead of these men.
Dismantling it, yeah.
Yeah. So this film, man, okay. My time now. As you know, whenever we watch a thing, we try to figure out the many things it could be saying and then try to educate on the overarching themes in reference to like how the horror of the film relates to the horrors of the real world. And this film had two very loud messages for me. One being that, pregnancy is hard. There's a lot of traumatic elements to it, which extends to the health risks associated with pregnancy, as well as just like the societal pressure on women to exist as mothers. And the second being the very violent and life-threatening way that the patriarchy shapes the medical field in relation to how pregnancy is handled in Western medicine. It's all super gross. So some might ask, like, when is it not? the patriarchy, racism, or capitalism. And to that I say, when something is systemic and drenched in every facet of society, more often than not, we're going to talk about at least one of them. And in this case, all of them.
Yep. It's like the end of Scooby-Doo episodes when they're like, who's under this mask? And then we like, we open it up where we're like, patriarchy, racism, capitalism, who knew?
Yeah, it's always.
Every time.
And I'm both always, but never surprised. Like, never surprised. Because it's just, if I can trust anything about everything that I've ever learned ever, is that America is always going to be drenched in violence and oppression and just horrific things. And there'll always be something new and upsetting to cover. So how does the patriarchy, racism, capitalism, and pregnancy interact within Western society? A lot of ways, man. Whether it's race and gender pay inequities, the attacks on reproductive rights and care options, the lack of sex education and resources, the lack of free health care. Fun fact. Pregnancy is listed as a pre-existing condition in most insurance plans. The widespread and non-consensual sterilization / non-consensual experiments and procedures done throughout history and still today, or the violence and neglect within the literal hospitals, all three are at play and are doing a ton of damage. So obviously, you know, we've touched on these topics many times, specifically, as Gabe mentioned in our population control episode, in the episode where we talk about the creation of vaccines, briefly, I think, in our Lovecraft episode, and others. And I'm sure for the rest of time, we will mention and come back to these topics again, because, as I said, we are never surprised by how gross society can be. And there's just always more. But this film is really stressful, and maybe not in the way that I expected or you'd expect from a horror movie, in that it is upsetting because this stuff has actually happened, and it actively happens to women for real. There are actual accounts of disgusting men using their power in the fertility field to rape women by spreading their seed because they're so narcissistic and delusional that they think they are the best thing that's ever happened to the world and need to exist 1,000 more times, as if human beings that are created exist as like actual human beings and not just extensions of themselves. So this is actually a real story. In fact, as a testament to Facebook's all listening ear, I was presented with an article without even searching for it, about a doctor in Canada who did the exact thing that happened in this film, but in real life, and like super recently. An article in the Washington Post titled, "Families Say the Fertility Doctor's Use of His Own Sperm to Impregnate Patients. Now He Must Pay Them Millions," as he should. Written by Jonathan Edwards on July 30th, 2021.
Oof. That was yesterday.
I know. They speak about this case, and in another article for BBC News on the same topic, it states that the doctor Norman Barwin has a class action suit that includes up to 226 people.
Oh no.
Some couples who were told that their male partner's sperm would be used were unknowingly given random samples, and in many cases, the doctor's own.
That's so disgusting.
Even more upsetting, this is not the only case of a fertility doctor blatantly abusing his power and raping women. An article in The Atlantic stated, "Fertility doctor Donald Klein's secret leads to new law," written by Sarah Zhang, outlines that the doctor used his own sperm 50 times without consent. In fact, after a quick Google search, an additional name was listed, and this case literally made me feel nauseous. Dr. Cecil B. Johnson was found guilty on March 5th, 1992, of using his own sperm without consent on up to potentially 75 women in his medical care. The article that I found was especially upsetting because it showed a quote from this man and his lawyer in the New York Times titled, "Doctor Found Guilty for Fertility Case." This disgusting man had the audacity to say in court, "I'm in shock. I really am," Dr. Jacobson said after his verdict was announced. "I spent my life trying to help these women have children. If I felt I was a criminal or broke the law, I would never have done it."
That's how delusional it is. Like, that's how deep that ideology goes.
Mm-hmm. Like, I still to this moment, physically not, like, the lack of remorse, the lack of even kind of understanding, the lack of empathy, the fact that society has perpetuated this idea that he was doing a service to these, just so much to unpack there. But I didn't even expect to focus so long on these disgusting men, because I had, before I even discovered these articles, had done extensive historical research on the destruction of midwives in Europe as a way to force women out of the decision-making process for their own deliveries, as well as research on how the patriarchy, racism, and capitalism all teamed up to hyper-medicalize the birthing process as a form of oppression, all while forcing the act of motherhood on women as a societal reinforcement of capitalism and subservience. I'll try to cover the rest of that as best as I can in the time that we have. And hopefully we'll get to cover these topics again in greater detail. And I highly recommend, I have a lot of sources for this episode. So do research, it made me never want to go to a hospital ever. In an article I found called Patriarchy Constructs Motherhood, written by Caitlin Heavner, they cite Dorothy E. Roberts, a post-colonial American scholar from Black feminists that argues that patriarchy is a part of the social construction of motherhood, that motherhood plays a critical role in the subordination of women. Motherhood, she says, becomes an identity for women, an identity that many women might not even want. But the patriarchy deems motherhood a woman's rite of passage. This quote stood out to me because of the line at the beginning of the film, which Gabe mentioned, really upset her. And further research, it seemed that there was a theme between the societal pressure to become mothers and that doing so as young as possible was the goal, that it was a means of establishing dependence on patriarchal and capitalistic structure, specifically in America. Specifically, the information that the American Society for Reproductive Medicine has intentionally skewed and encouraged pregnancy before the age of 35 with this idea that it is not possible to do so after. In fact, in an article from The Guardian, it is time to reassess our obsession with women's fertility and the number 35, written by Arwa Madawi. She states that this information is intentionally pulled from 1700s France. Take, for example, she says, the oft-cited statistic that 1 in 3 women aged 35 to 39 will not be pregnant after a year of trying. Want to know where the statistic comes from? Data from 1700s France. Researchers looked at a bunch of church birth records from before and where people whose life expectancy at the time was around 30 and came up with these statistics. One imagines the researchers would have ridiculed this in any other scenario. However, the statistic serves as a very useful purpose of shaming and scaring women. It was parroted endlessly for this reason. One study published in 2004 looked at 770 European women and found that with sex at least twice a week, 78% of these women aged 35 to 40 conceived within a year, compared to the 84% of women aged 20 to 34. The Atlantic notes that these encouraging figures were left out of the American Society of Reproductive Medicine's 2008 committee opinion on female age and fertility, which instead relied on the most ominous historical data. A few years later, the ASRM also launched a controversial ad campaign reminding people that women in their 20s and early 30s are most likely to conceive, which through more research and studying is not necessarily true. And why would the American Society for Reproductive Medicine skew their stats to be more daunting? Because it is beneficial to the system to have children be born from younger women who have less financial independence and stability and who are more likely to become indebted to the medical industry and likely to have more children so that they feed into the lower labor industry and so on. How else would they continue to maintain poverty necessary to uphold these billionaires? How else would Jeff Bezos get to fly a penis into space? And I continue. In a blog post from Mother Love titled, "What Does It Mean to Decolonize Birth?" Bentley Potterfield Finn Adula states, many hospitals in the United States follow the technocratic model of birth. According to a researcher, Robbie Davis Floyd, the technocratic model of birth views the female body as a machine regarding the birth of a baby as the most important end of product. The mother is a secondary byproduct. The model is grounded in Western society's view that science, high technology, and economic profit are the goal. In birth context, a technocratic approach emphasizes mind-body separation, sees a patient as an object with literal personal relationship to the practitioner, and is characterized by aggressive intervention and values standardization of care. Essentially, the model seeks to not prioritize the safety of the mother, their emotions, or how they want to have their own personal birthing experience, and instead aims to basically act as another way of oppression to feed the labor industry. It all connects. In terms of decolonizing birth, it's not about getting rid of hospitals or demonizing medical model of care. In fact, it's more about medical interventions and environments that can be life-saving for some. Instead, it is about trusting natural physiological birth and being conscious of how power operates when we do so. It's about making various dimensions of care accessible to all birthing persons, regardless of race, religion, sexual orientation, or class. And it requires like an intersectional approach that considers all of these dimensions and ultimately just values like all birthing traditions, and meeting people where they are and what they need.
It's like what Grace was saying in the film. And also like considering what we talked about in our last episode, which She Never Died, like in that intersectionality piece, like how many just Black women have died at the hands of medical doctors who don't understand them or don't believe them. And now imagining like, you have to trust them not only with your life, but the life of your baby, and how often the medical industry values the life of the baby more than the person, like the human, like a woman who's doing it, and is there, like.
And in reference to intersectionality, there is a whole other layer that I have not even been able to get to, that I'm sure we will talk about in later episodes, and I hope we do, just for educational purposes. But essentially, my final question here is I'm asking, how did we get here? How did the system get established as it is? And for that, I refer to a paper written by the Physiological and Ethical Issues publication titled Male Appropriation and Medicalization of Childbirth, a Historical Analysis, written by Heather A. Cahill from the University of New York. In this paper, they provide an outline on how midwifery was devalued in the 17th and 18th century, essentially as a method of shifting power from the hands of women to the control of men. Something that was interesting about this was the intersection between midwifery and witchcraft. For centuries, medicine and religion have systemically devalued assigned female roles and traits and excluded women from the power in society through patriarchal ideology, misogynist preoccupations with women's reproductive power, a position clearly reflected in the Christian church's obsession with witchcraft during the Middle Ages. Einrich and English identify 3 central accusations against witches that have remained consistent throughout history: their sexuality, their organization, and paradoxically, their healing powers, which included attendance at childbirth, is the third one. It all stemmed from an envy and fear that women would use this as an outlet to organize, and ultimately was another area of life that men sought to control. The paper goes on to argue that the pursuit of the healthcare monopoly was created with the purpose of excluding women from practicing in public domain as a method of further subjugating women and maintaining control. The shift really took place between the 17th and 18th centuries when men devalued the midwife profession from a scientific standpoint, essentially pushing their way into the female domain. In terms of midwifery was a heavily women-dominated field. And specifically, prior to the invention of forceps, men had only been involved in problematic deliveries, their instruments guaranteeing the death of the fetus and frequently also that of the mother. But essentially, small numbers of midwives gained possession of forceps and learned some of the midwife practices and essentially stole them. So during the 18th century, medical practitioners armed with their greater scientific knowledge and biology began more systematically disputing and devaluing midwives' knowledge. Describes essentially a mix of their own experience that was handed down, like midwives had their own experience handed down through generations of attending women, was basically just disregarded. And it was one way that they achieved this was through their opposition of abortion and the witch trials. They murdered so many women who essentially helped make safe birthing environments. So thus, the subordination of traditional experiential midwife was shifted to the more formal knowledge and training from which women, of course, were excluded, which was the medical industry and the monopolizing of the medical industry to take over birth. And it all inherently goes by this inherent understanding in Western society that men are more superior than women, even though that is factually not true. And there's a lot more in that paper to unpack. I didn't even get to read the entire thing because it was very long. And I spent so much time, just the fact that these gross men existed in the first place that enacted what this movie was saying was so scary in real life, there was more than one case. It was just so horrific. And I didn't even get to touch on the fact that there's a whole different element and experience to what it is, like racially, that racism plays such a big part. And I know we'll get to that hopefully in the future. And we've talked about it previously in some end, but like, my God,
yeah, the
level of just gross, and that's just like surface, that's just surface level gross. There's so much more.
Yeah. And it's always like awful to hear, because, like, you hear you hear one story or whatever, and you're like, okay, like, one evil person. But not, and then you hear, like, 2, 3, but then you also hear about, like, the actual structures and, like, the textbooks and the instruments and all the other, like, ways in which they're looking to oppress women. It's like, oh, it keeps going. It just keeps going. And it's in there, and it's been there for forever. The fact that article was from July 30th, which is, again, the day before we're recording this, is disgusting. Yeah.
And I mean, just the fact that not only are these experiments, like, that these experiments are still happening today. Like, we had that whole episode with the prison system and how they're forced sterilization of women, or just like really just non-consensual medical experimentation on women that's happening, like, literally now.
Yeah.
In various states. Like, and that probably, honestly, that the fact that there's this doctor that did this as of like 3 days ago, there's probably even more cases. There's
that we don't see.
So much that exists in this country, and that it's all very intentional.
Yeah.
And I think that's like the most upsetting element, is that there's such intentionality behind all of this that I think we don't often get to, like, really look at and see.
And their belief, right? Like, that's how strongly that they believe in their superiority, that they would do something this horrific and not realize how horrific it is. And
I think they're heroes. They think they're doing a good thing.
And I think what's, like, worse with this film is that something like that is very real and is happening right now was used as this, like, punchline twist ending, as opposed to actually being dived into and discussed. Because it, like, in horror, as we talk about often, you can use this as a way to actually comment on the issues, but it's not doing that. It's just like, oh, all along it was this, and you didn't really know what to think, because we had that one line in the beginning, and then the rest of the film was kind of a fog, because nothing meant anything, and we were trying too hard to be artistic without actually being artistic. Is like a student film, which is, again, it's like another gripe we have with M. Night Shyamalan's Old, was like the ending was, again, using all of these different things to be like, haha, the whole time it was this, what a surprise, instead of like, okay, but no, that actually needs to be unpacked and talked about, or you can't use it. Like, you can't bring that here. For just to just show it off. Like, you're not doing you're actually not doing anything. And
don't just use mental illness as a scapegoat.
Yeah. Or be like, haha, big pharma, right? They're awful. It's like, yeah, they are. Got anything else to say about it? No? Okay, cool. And to me, it's like, I feel like the Dr. John in False Positive was like a fairy tale villain. Like he wasn't real. Like I don't think John Lee understands how real he is, and that he really like he was like a clown. Like he was like, of course he's evil. He's just evil. Like, but those men in those stories that you were covering are real humans that these women to some degree had to trust, right? And ended up there. So many of them trusted him. They had to be more trustworthy than Dr. John was, because there's never a time when I felt comfortable with him. So it's like it kind of puts the onus again on those women to be like, well, why did you trust them? Like, no, that's not, it's like, why did he do that? That's the problem here. I just feel like a lot of it was like he got handed, or he, because he worked with a writer, he got handed this interesting idea and they didn't really unpack it or spend enough time with it to figure out what they wanted to say, so much as they just wanted to do a surprise. Yeah.
And society is just so gross. And this film tried a little, but it didn't. It didn't. And I totally agree with you. Like, it was trying to like be like, this guy, obviously the worst, right? But it's like, there are people who are doing that now and who are actively not being stopped by the people who are just like being like, he's doing great things. He's doing great things for these women by giving them the gift of child.
So that they can do what they are supposed to do as women.
Yeah. And there's just so much wrong. There's such delusion that exists and is intentionally like upheld. And I think that's like the hardest thing to swallow in all of this. But I guess to end on a happier note, I don't really have one. I don't really.
I was like, what? What do you mean? I would say that what I want to end with, one is, if you haven't listened to previous episodes of ours, definitely do. And we mentioned, we've covered population control. We've covered the oppression of women twice, two types with Stepford Wives and Handmaid's Tale. We have covered the forced sterilization of women in prison, the forced sterilization of Puerto Rican women by the American government. And we've covered pregnancy and medical harm. Like we've covered it, and we will probably cover more of these things, because at the end of the day, what we always want people to realize is that horror and media is always trying to, even if not well, even if it doesn't do it well, is trying to teach you something or to highlight that there are real horrors happening, and you should be aware of them. So make sure that you like and subscribe so that you know what's coming up next. And if you want to, let us know about any issues that you have experienced, or if you... I don't know, you feel differently about this film, whatever it is.
Or even if there's like more, like if you want to hear more of these things and things to unpack. Like I honestly, as a reflection of this episode, I think it would be really dope to have just like an entire very long series where it would be very sad because we just have to learn about all the oppressive things that have happened to women, and that's awful. But that we find media that does it right and find media that does it bad. And if that's something people would want, or if there's like topics within this realm that we haven't covered yet or haven't looked at yet that you think would be good, we'd love to hear about them, because it's always good to learn new things, even if it's hard to learn them.
Yeah, even if it's hard. And if you do know of any organizations or groups that are working actively to combat these issues, we'll look up some ourselves and have them in our show notes, but we're always welcome more suggestions. So if you know someone who's doing the work, like, we want to highlight them, we want to bring that to light, because it is truly horrific. And as lackluster as this film was, I'm thankful to some degree in that it did allow us to actually look into that, and as upsetting as it is to learn about, it's important that we do, so that we can highlight those things and kind of try to do something. Because the first step is knowing, and the second step is showing up. At it. Yeah, exactly.
Second is showing up. That's very true. Yes. So if you know resources, 100%.
Share.
That's our long-term dream, is to be
that kind of resource
to
for
do
you.
the show up time.
Yeah. So, yeah, with that being said, I hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope you enjoyed We Moto and Take Back the Night as well. We have some pretty good things coming up this series for the month of August, so stay tuned. And don't get married.
Delete your kids.
Yeah, and just putting out there that the kids were innocent. The kids deserve to live because they didn't do that. And they're still your children. That's a different discussion. It just made me think of Mariska Hargitay, her character in SVU, because she was a child of rape. And I was like, ooh, someone should just watch that. That's the only part of like SVU.
Yeah.
Can hold up. All right, well.
And she's doing work too.
She's doing work, yeah. She's got her stuff out there to check out the rape kits. So thank you, Mariska. All right. Well, on that note, have a good day.
Yeah.
All right.
Learn stuff. Do it. And self-care. In addition to learn stuff, do it.
Go watch something nice.
Yeah.
Go treat yourself.
Not this movie.
Go watch Tragedy Girls.
Yeah.
Yeah. Go watch Bit. You'll still have a good time at the beginning.
Yeah. Agreed.